Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another Prelude Animal Health webinar. I actually have a fun poll today before we jump into it. I need a name for this, and I need to enlist all of you to help us with this name. So we have a few options that I'm going to put in a poll. And if they're all lame, that's okay, because I have one that says other, and then you can write it in. So I'm going to launch this poll. And I'd love to enlist all your help in picking what we should name this awesome animal health discussion dialogue that we're having regularly. And whatever wins, we will name it that. Okay, while we're doing that, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items. So, we love the Q&A. Again, I want to make this as pertinent to you guys as possible. And by the way, this is the sun. It's not, my kid didn't write on my wall, just for what it's worth. Um, so we'd love for the Q&A to come from you guys. I'll tee it up. I'll ask Aaron some questions, and then hopefully, throughout the course, something piques your interest. But we'd love for you to steer the discussion so that it's most relevant to you. There'll be a quick survey at the end. We love these surveys. Please be as open and honest as you can. And if you have other ideas or topics that you'd like us to discuss, we're always open to those. Keep on the lookout for your emails. If you have friends or colleagues that may not be getting these notifications, please reach out to your customer success representative and we would gladly put them on the list. And also, final note that this session is being recorded. Also, one other thing, we have another webinar coming out. This will be a more species generic discussion on just general complex trials. That'll be on December 16th. Without further ado, please welcome Aaron Johnson. Dr. Aaron Johnson is a Principal Regulatory Affairs Manager for Clinical R&D at Argenta. As most of you know, a global CRO, CDMO dedicated to advancing animal health. In his role at Argenta, Aaron brings deep expertise at the intersection of clinical development and regulatory strategy, helping sponsors navigate complex approval pathways for veterinary therapeutics. Prior to joining Argenta, he spent about 6 years in clinical practice, as well as leadership roles at Elanco, contributing to multiple pet health therapeutic programs. He holds his DVM, a master's in reproductive physiology, and a bachelor's in animal science from Purdue University. With that, welcome, Aaron.
Thank you, Tommy. That was a kind of a pretty big build up there. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I need to put a little more excitement. I want to get these things started off with a little more energy going forward. I think that's one of my takeaways when I watch myself. But we're really excited to have you.
Thank
The
you.
topic of regulatory is arguably the most important or the most interesting to folks out there. I hope to do a lot more of these in the future. I'd love to get CVM on here at some point. Um, all right, the poll results are in. Did you vote, Aaron? Did you vote for one of these
I, I
topics?
tried. I tried clicking it. I don't know if it. I wasn't sure if it went through on my end or not.
Wow, I'm surprised. I thought Animal Health Hour would win, but it is not. It's in third place. Clinical conversations in animal health and animal health insights are neck and neck, but animal health insights is the leader so far. Okay. Animal health insights. All right. I'm gonna write that down. Okay, but that is enough about that. Thank you everybody for participating. Aaron, let's jump into it.
Sure.
So why don't I start? Um, maybe you can tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into regulatory policy, how you started working with CVM, what experiences have most influenced your perspective on, innovation and drug development. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about your story.
Great. Well, like you said, I did a master's degree in veterinary school at Purdue. Doing the master's degree before vet school really got me interested in research. I spent one summer actually at Pfizer at the time doing a summer internship while I was in vet school, which really got me interested in the drug development and pharmaceutical industry. So after a number of years of practice, I just kind of felt the need for a change, and drug development really called to me. So my first role was in regulatory affairs. I will be candid and say at first when I heard about the role, I thought it sounded about maybe one of the most boring jobs in the industry, to be honest. The more I learned about what the role entailed, getting to use scientific background, right? Understanding the drugs, interactions with the FDA, helping assist with study design and clinical trials. Really spoke to me and was very appealing. And to be honest, I've absolutely loved it. So that was a little bit about it. And the opportunity came up really kind of more by chance. I wasn't seeking a role in regulatory affairs. It was kind of the role that was open at the time. So I was trying to get into industry, but the more I learned about it, I loved it. And been doing it for the most part, a couple little excursions, but for the most part, been doing it last 13 years straight.
That's great. That's great. And from your vantage point, what do you see as sort of the biggest opportunities or challenges facing developers, kind of new startups or developers of novel veterinary therapeutics today?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think probably the biggest opportunity. So the majority of clients that we interact with, right, they're not going to be some of the big players. I know many of them are on the call, but we work a lot with a lot of smaller companies, startups, biotechs, companies coming out of universities and things like that. So I think one of the biggest opportunities is the amount of technology and biotechnology that's available, right? So we have a lot of clients that that are able to utilize technology from human health, and obviously there's a lot of advances there. So I think probably now more than ever, the amount of innovation that we have access to in the veterinary side is just tremendous. I think one of the biggest challenges I think we probably see is often a lot of clients think, well, getting this developed for an animal is going to be easy. It's going to be obviously it is quicker than human development for sure, but they think it's going to be quick and not very expensive. And I think a lot of times a lot of the startups and smaller companies are hit with that realization of the amount of cost it takes, the amount of time it takes, even though it's for animals and not humans, to get that all the way through approval. And often that could become a real challenge. And then for them, a lot of times they're having to find investors and gain capital to advance these projects, and sometimes that can be a challenge as well. So again, I think there's a lot of great technology out there. It's for a lot of smaller companies in particular, it's timely and costly to get them to the point that that they can even sell it off to a larger animal health company.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, so let's introduce the topic. For those that don't know or maybe less familiar, can you kind of give us a quick overview of what the expanded conditional approval process is?
Sure. Yep. So that was a pathway that was developed to try to bring new technology to market where a clinical trial is going to be exceedingly complex or difficult, right? So some folks on the call may know this already, but there's kind of three main criteria for expanded conditional approval, or two criteria. And the first one is broken into two parts, right? One is that it treats a serious or life-threatening disease or condition. And CVM's guidance number 261 has a lot of this detail, which I'm sure many folks on this call have read. Treats a serious or life-threatening disease or condition, or it meets an unmet human, animal or human health need. So really what that means is likely that there's not going to be an approved therapy available, or that your product will provide a meaningful advantage, typically in terms of safety or effectiveness, or both, over an approved product. So it has to be one of those two criteria. And then the other criteria is going to be that you have a clinical trial that's going to be of a complex or challenging nature. And by that, it could be difficulty in enrolling patients. It could be you need a large number of animals. It's going to take a long time to enroll animals. You have to identify and determine new endpoints. You want to use biomarkers, things of that nature. So that's kind of the general criteria for eligibility to expanded conditional approval. For those that are approval with MUMS, which is minor use or minor species, right? We think of expanded conditional approval as a pathway to conditional approval for a major use in a major species, right? That's kind of the way to think about it. So with
Are there
conditional
common
approval,
therapeutic areas that kind of fall in that complex? Like what are some of the common benchmarks you see that would that you would encourage somebody to take this path.
Yep. Yeah. So one of the ones, and this is actually listed in the guidance as one of the criteria for a difficult or complex disease, and that would be a delay in progression of some form of a disease, right? So that's actually written out there. So if you're looking at a delay in cardiac disease and renal disease, a delay in progression right of that is likely going to qualify you for that. Um, I know that in terms of large number of animals, we have. The other thing I'll say too is also disease modification, right? So things like osteoarthritis, disease modifying osteoarthritis products. We know that those can take some time for the osteoarthritis to progress. So. And then, I know one example that's out there, maybe be on the call is, we have projects now for anti-aging, right? In which case, we need a very large population of animals, a large number, right? So, I think those would be some of the examples off the top of my head that we see quite often.
Okay. And are you seeing this sort of alternative path being like as a proportion of all paths taken? Is it growing? Is it slowing down? Is it staying the same? How do you seeing it trend?
Yeah. So again, on the early side, I would say the interest in conditional approval, especially for a lot of the smaller startups, is extremely high. So it's probably one of the most common questions that we get from a lot of startups is, can this go down the expanding conditional approval pathway? So I think the interest is very high. We've seen a number of products. I think there's at least 5 products out there on the market now that are conditionally approved. So and just the last few years, right? Last, I think 4 or 5 years. So I do think that the interest is very high and likely growing. So.
Okay, neat.
Yeah.
All right. And what is the difference between the reasonable expectation of effectiveness and substantial evidence of effectiveness?
Yep. So in order to gain a conditional approval, the sponsor has to show a reasonable expectation of effectiveness. So the difference between that and what we call substantial evidence of effectiveness is reasonable expectation of effectiveness, which in CVM will be a technical section if you go down that route and become eligible, is showing that the product is likely to have an effect. And that can be done through a number of ways. That can be done through pilot data, whether it's pilot field or pilot lab data. It can be done through published literature. It can be done through foreign data. CVM does say that even the extrapolation of diseases in other species can be used as well. So it's basically showing that your product is likely to have its proposed effect. That conditional approval will require the sponsor to still complete a full all the other technical sections in their entirety. So CMC, target animal safety, et cetera, will also have to be done to the same standards as a full approval. But it does allow the sponsor to get that conditional approval for, based upon a likelihood that the product will have its effect.
And when is substantial evidence of effectiveness required in that path?
Yep. So once a conditional approval is obtained, the sponsor, the conditional approval is good for 1 year, and you can renew it up to 5 times, right? So essentially, you have about 5 years to submit that full effectiveness technical section with your substantial evidence data and gain that approval. So it will have to be done within 5 years. Now, the sponsor can begin their pivotal work prior to the conditional approval being granted. So you can complete your reasonable expectation of effectiveness technical section. And while you're finishing those up, you can start your pivotal work prior to conditional approval. But from the time of conditional approval, you have to gain full approval within 5 years.
Got it. Okay. Couple of points of clarification on some criteria. What is meant by a serious or life-threatening disease or condition? Also unmet animal or human health needs, and also a complex or particularly difficult study or studies. Can you walk us through each one of those and how the folks on here can kind of understand them?
Sure. Yep. Like I said, it is all outlined in CVM guidance 261. But basically, a serious or life-threatening condition, there's kind of three main things. One is that you're going to have a high level of morbidity to that animal that kind of affects their normal day-to-day function, right? So think about something like osteoarthritis would qualify, or you have have an increased mortality associated with that disease. The second thing could be that it is a zoonotic disease, so that it's something that is going to spread from animals to humans. And then the third, which is specific to food animals, is that you would have widespread morbidity in food-producing animals, such that it may impact a herd of animals, or or even a portion of the food supply. In terms of unmet animal or human health need, basically that means that what's available now is not addressed by approved current therapy, right? So CVM does not consider extra label use to be a criteria in that. But basically, either it's not available, so there is no approved product for that indication, or as I mentioned earlier, that it provides a meaningful advantage over other therapies, right? So either there is an approved product, but this may have better effectiveness. It may be more safe than other therapies. It may be more safe when used in conjunction with other therapies used to treat that condition. So basically, that's going to offer something that's going to be bigger and better. And then we already kind of touched on that, the complex or difficult clinical trial design, right? That's going to be time consuming, need a large number of animals. It's going to be a delay in progression. I think one thing I didn't mention before is also an extended period of drug administration. So it's something that you have to give the drug for longer than you might, for other types of therapies. So those are some of the details of
Okay.
where a product would be eligible for that.
That's great. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to throw it out to the audience. How should sponsors balance the need for fully compliant CMC documentation with the more flexible effectiveness requirement during conditional approval? How should they think about those?
Yep. Yeah. So, as we said, a conditional approval is going to require all of the technical sections to be complete, and we do know that a lot of times the CMC, or for those that are aware, the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls technical section can sometimes take a lot of time, especially if you're dealing with new novel types of therapies as well, right? Some of these products will bring extra challenges in. So, one of the things that we'll encourage sponsors to do when they're considering whether or not expanding conditional approval is the right pathway for them is, what does that CMC development plan look like? And we encourage sponsors, especially if it's something new or novel, to try to get into CVM and meet with them early and get CVM to understand that technology and understand, what challenges they may have and what's going to be required to get that technical section complete. I think often a lot of new clients will come in and think that expanding conditional approval will get them to approval faster, and it may, and sometimes it does. But if you can get that reasonable expectation of effectiveness done quickly, but you still have 3, 4, 5 years left on your CMC technical section before you get to approval, then it's possible in some instances you might be able to get a full approval in the same amount of time as a conditional, depending on that time to get your CMC technical section complete, or other technical sections, not just CMC. But that's the main thing that we do as encourage sponsors is to make sure that they have a good, robust development plan. They understand all the aspects of what they need to get all of those technical sections complete, and not just focus on effectiveness. And make sure that they're meeting with CVM to understand what those requirements are and what data they're going to need, and stay on top of that CMC work.
Have you seen a trend when people, folks take an interest in going down this conditional approval process, like what the hit rate is, what the success rate is of being approved for it? And is there certain criteria that you see, like, okay, probably tell with a certain amount of probability that this is going to pass?
Yeah. So one of the first things you do early on in development is to seek eligibility for expanded conditional approval, right? So that's something early on the sponsor will need to make a submission to CVM. It's got a 100-day review. Basically, those 3 criteria that we just talked about, they will have to submit that into CVM with all of their justifications for why they meet one or both of the first criteria and then the second criteria. And I will say that a lot of times that last criteria, which is the difficult or complex clinical study design, is probably one of the tougher things to get CVM to agree upon. For a lot of new sponsors, they always think their clinical trial is going to be tough and challenging, but they usually are, but it has to be exceedingly tough and challenging. So all of that information has to be submitted into CVM early on, including the indication and their proposal for their pivotal studies, and get CVM to agree. Once they're eligible for conditional approval early on, then they can start focusing on, what their reasonable expectation of effectiveness technical section will look like, et cetera. So I would say that, in that early stage, I think, we have a lot of clients that, when they make the application, they have a pretty good success rate in terms of getting that eligibility. I don't know if I have any data of the number that make it all the way through approval. I assume it's probably fairly similar to the general, rate of approval, right? I mean, we know that from start to finish, it's maybe 10% that actually make it, to that stage. So I don't have any hard fast data on that, but I assume it's probably about
Sure.
as challenging as a normal drug.
And then what percentage of your clients, like when a startup comes to you or when somebody with an idea comes to you, what percentage of them would you say want to take this path versus an alternative path versus the
Yep.
traditional?
Yeah. So we have quite a diverse number of clientele that anywhere from generics to biotechnology to everything in between, companion and food. So we do see quite a few. I mean, I would guess probably 20%. Again, when you look at across all of those, some of those, if someone's developing a generic, they know it's not gonna, not gonna
Yeah.
go that route. But really, when you look across the board, yeah, I would say maybe around 20%, at least have an interest in it. Doesn't mean they all get to the point that they're going to apply for eligibility, but probably at least get 20-25%.
Got it. Okay, great. I'm going to pause. I've talked a lot. I'm going to introduce some awkward silence to everybody. Would love for anybody listening to share any thoughts, any questions that they want to ask Aaron, based on what they heard, where they want to take the discussion, anything that's, particularly curious, you're curious about, feel free to put it in the Q&A. All right, we got our first one. If a product has been conditionally approved and renewed multiple times, have you seen that CVM would consider granting full approval based primarily on a real-world evidence package rather than requiring a pivotal trial?
Yep. So we haven't seen that. I would assume if it's been renewed multiple times, you would probably have to have that. And I'm guessing the question, maybe the question asked, we can clarify that CVM would have already and the sponsor agreed upon what that approval process is going to look like to get to full approval. So I'm not sure if the question is saying that that you've renewed multiple times and maybe not been successful in your trial and therefore looking to switch, or if it's that full approval is going to be based solely on real world evidence. So I'm not quite sure which way that question is going, but I would say I've not yet seen any instances, generally speaking, where that full approval is going to be based on real world evidence either way. Certainly that would be, I think, a good opportunity for that reasonable expectation. But I haven't seen any instances yet where CVM's accepted the real world evidence for the full approval.
Mm-hmm.
But if
Got
the
it.
speaker wants to clarify if it's shifting gears or if it's just having pre-alignment with CVM, that's the pathway. Happy to address that as well. But I'll say not yet.
Okay, great. Okay, what other questions? That was a great one. Any other questions from the audience? Not everyone jump out at once. Oh, we got another one. When comparing RxE and substantial evidence, are there differences in the expectations of raw data sharing with CVM?
Yeah. So yeah, inherently there are differences because we mentioned there are different different criteria for reasonable expectation, right? So it can be pilot data, it can be published literature, foreign data, etc. I would say I think that there is still a relatively high bar from our experience of what CDM is going to want to see. Now they do recognize that if you're, for example, submitting a pilot study, right, it might not be GCP, right? It might have been pilot, it might have been in the field, but maybe it's a non-GCP study. So I do think that they have different expectations, but I still think that they expect a strong, robust data package, but probably not to the level of a fully conducted pivotal GCP type study. In terms of literature or real world evidence of things of that nature. Again, it's not just a matter of hey, we've got a couple of publications. They're going to really get dialed in on dosage form and and the dose and the population and they still have pretty high expectations, but it's not quite. I don't think it's not quite the same as a pivotal study because they recognize that it wasn't conducted to those standards, but it's still going to be robust. And they're going to
Got
they
it.
still want, and they're just for those that haven't been through it to clarify, they still want to see the raw data, what you have.
Yeah. Well, that leads to the next question, which is what file types do you typically send to CVM for data?
So it would be, assuming we're talking about a study, it's going to be the same by file types. I don't know if they mean like format or like what data they want to see, but the
XML or anything other than XML?
Yeah. It's the reasonable expectation technical section in e-submitter looks pretty similar to an effectiveness technical section. So they're going to still ask if you use electronic data capture, and if so, they're going to want to see those data files. They're going to see that any PDF copies of any raw data that you have. They'll still, if you've conducted the stats, they're going to still want to see your XML and XBT files. So it's going to look pretty similar to a normal effectiveness technical section. It might just not have the exact same content because of the pilot nature.
Hopefully one day, the dream of mine, they don't need to see any sort of file type. They just sign in the system, review it straight from the system. Starting to do that early, starting to do that a little bit more and more.
Yep.
I hope to have somebody from CVN on early next year to talk about that process, where they think it's going to go. Okay, we got a couple questions.
I mean, 13 years, and I know, and there's others on this call that have probably have been involved in this longer, but raw data is a constant, right? It's been discussed for a long time. So
they always say that the way it's been described to me by CVM is that because when they compare to the human side, there's so much fewer subjects that they just need a little more data. The raw data is important to make up for that gap. That population gap. Okay. Do you have any examples of when conditional approval was denied and for what reason?
So maybe I might take this in two parts. So I've seen instances where CVM has not agreed with the complexity of the clinical trial design, or expressed concerns that that a product is not going to be eligible because they might not feel that the study design is complex or difficult enough. I've not yet seen one where we've gotten to the point of submitting the RxE text section or for conditional approval and having it denied at the end because of that. So I haven't seen that yet. I'm sure it's happened. Right, I'm sure it's happened.
Yeah.
But I think one of the, I'll say, advantages is typically the reasonable expectation of effectiveness technical section is going to be, you can accomplish that usually a lot earlier in the program, right? You're not relying on waiting for GMP material and kind of doing it towards the end. It can be done up front. So I think if there is an advantage, a sponsor can find out usually a little more early on whether it's going to be eligible and whether the information they plan to submit is going to meet that criteria. So, but I've not seen an instance yet personally where it's been denied late in the game.
Got it. Okay, another one. For the CT after the conditional approval, is the CVM involved in the process just the same as a regular approval or more often due to the increased complexity?
Yeah, I would say generally they're going to be involved, I think, to the same extent. I think one thing that does come up, especially when you get into some of the novel biotechnologies that you might have to consider, where I think CVM may be more involved, is if the clinical trial material is something where the formulation that you're using for your pivotal trial might change or have an impact on the CMC technical section or on the pilot, the reasonable expectation data. So I think where CVM might get more involved sometimes afterwards is going to be maybe not so much in the clinical trial itself, but looking holistically of, how does your final formulation material, your GMP material, being used in the pivotal study? If it wasn't used for your pilot, how do all those pieces fit together? So I know we've had some discussions with at least one sponsor of what that might look like down the road. So now that being said, I think again, there's certainly I'm sure there's instances where CVM might be more involved, right? If you're talking about a study that has large numbers of animals or things like that, I'm sure there's instances where CVM may be more involved, but I would say generally speaking, it may be conducted in a similar manner.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that
Gotcha.
answers it.
All right, next question. Is the timeline for data submission review the same for conditional approval as for full approval?
Yeah, in terms of the technical sections, the timelines are all the same. Yep. Reasonable expectation of effectiveness has 180-day review time, just like the normal effectiveness technical section. So those would all be the same.
Great questions. Any more? Yes, there is more. What data does CVM ask for to renew the CA?
Yeah, good question. And that's one that just from our clientele, we're just kind of now venturing into that space with one that was just recently conditionally approved. But it's so we haven't lived through that a whole lot yet. But I'm guessing in that application, it's going to be a matter of just kind of providing that justification of right. Here's what we've done. Here's how many animals we've rolled. Here's the status of our study. I think it's going to be just. I don't know if they necessarily need to see actual data. I'm guessing it's going to be more of an explanation or or an update of what's been done. So, but I would say it's probably going to be more of in my understanding, it's more of a justification of here's how we're advancing, not submitting data as you go.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, when you go and position this to a sponsor, what's the case that you make? What story do you tell the sponsor to generate interest in this?
Yep. So it kind of goes two ways. There's maybe two parts. Is how do we propose it, and a lot of times they come having already read about it. So I would say probably the majority of the time, right? They come to us and they want to understand. Hey, we've read about this and we want to know more. So, but there are some instances where we do say, that this would work. One of the things that we see sometimes is, the sponsor might say, well, they might be looking at a certain indication, or they might be looking at multiple indications, and they may not realize that. Well, hey, if you use this indication, this one here may be eligible, right? So typically it's going to be a matter of just kind of going through with the sponsor of, here's the criteria, here's where, we think your product will meet those criteria or might not, or might be a challenge to justify to CVM. And then we do a fair number of pre-INAD meetings with CVM, right? So the sponsor hasn't opened an INAD, you can't go in and have a pre-INAD meeting to discuss expanded conditional approval. That's one of the criteria for a pre-INAD meeting. So we'll discuss that with the agency if they're interested. But again, I think a lot of it is just talking with the sponsor of the timelines and an understanding of, here's where it can save you time. Here's the other things that we need to consider of, that you still have to do all the full amount of work and, and do we think this is going to serve as an advantage? I would say if they haven't already read about expanded conditional approval, they're always interested to know more. It's very exciting for them, especially if they're looking to gain, investor dollars or capital. So it's just gonna be a matter of just kind of looking across those, and I think it's because we get the question so often. It's something that's especially with new clients, something that's always on the forefront of our mind of is this going to qualify, right? Because we see it, we see such a fair amount of interest. So,
Okay. Another one from the audience: is there increased expectations to notify CVM of SAEs during the clinical trial? I.e., there has been some conditional approvals that have been pulled due to lack of efficacy. For instance, chemotherapy drugs. At what point does CVM start asking more questions or looking at data?
Yeah, and I don't know if I would say that there's more requirements, right? But I think that I think it's going to be pretty similar to any other clinical trial or approved product in terms of monitoring for that. But I guess the uniqueness would be is that you would have your pivotal trial and a conditional approval, right? So they may have access to generating data on serious or receiving adverse event data in two different avenues, right? Either from your clinical trial or through your typical post-approval route. But I mean, obviously, in this case, I think safety is always a concern with CVM. I think one of the challenges, and maybe where they have an increased interest in safety data, is normally when you get a full approval, right? You've already completed your pivotal clinical trial. You have provided them with all of your field safety data, but in many instances with these, your pilot study may be small, right? So they're having to make a safety assessment based on a target animal safety study with 32 animals and maybe much more limited field safety data, right? So I think in that case, they probably have a higher level of interest. I don't know if it generates any increased reporting requirements, but I think certainly that's something that they may, have maybe a closer eye on during the course of that study is, are we seeing adverse events that weren't any concern? So,
have you seen any of them get pulled? Like have it's removed that conditional approval because of more data?
Not that I've seen. Yeah, again, if we're talking specifically in the expanded conditional approval, because as a reminder, right, conditional approval can be used for both MUMs and for expanded conditional approval. At the end of the day, a conditional approval is a conditional approval. It's two avenues to get there. In terms of expanding conditional approval, I haven't. I mean, I know in the past, there have been, MUMs has been around a lot longer, so there's probably more examples of products that didn't meet the requirements in the allotted time, or may have been pulled. But I think in the expanded conditional approval, not yet.
Gotcha. Okay. Couple more. Wow, we're getting a lot here. That's great. What is the interest level among sponsors in direct EDC access for CVM? Great question. I did not plant that. Is it currently being utilized? Yes. And what is the likelihood that CVM will not require raw data submissions if direct EDC access is a pathway in the future? Or side tangent, I hope to have the source answer that question sometime early next year. But Aaron, what do you think?
Yeah. So again, because our clients tend to be a little bit earlier in the process, because they're usually smaller companies, startup companies. We've not had any direct experience with that. I know that there's a pilot program ongoing with CVM. I've not personally been a part of that. Tommy, you might have more experience than I do in this realm, to be honest.
Your firm has, but maybe you have.
Yeah. Me personally, we work in our our own little group off to the side that interacts mostly with the smaller companies. So I've had pretty limited experience with that, but
Okay.
I think it's going to be something we're going to hear. We'll be hearing a lot more about it.
Yeah.
Will it alleviate the need to submit raw data at the end? I don't know about that. I guess it depends on whether or not CVM feels that within that period of that clinical trial, right, depending on the duration of the clinical trial, can they review all that data in that a lot of time, and then what about other data that might now fall within that actual EDC build, that they'd like to see as well. And time will tell. This is just my opinion. Others might disagree. I guess I'd be surprised if there's going to be no submission, but we could certainly hope for that. So
I don't like your pessimism, Aaron. Just kidding. Selfishly,
it's not mine. We would love to see that. But,
no, you're taking the typical response from somebody in your position, which is good. More oversight. Okay, another question for you. Are there any cons to pursuing conditional approval, even if you meet the criteria? When would you not want to do it? Seems like, from what you've said, it seems like a no-brainer if you approve, right?
Yeah. I think, and I guess so. I'm gonna answer that maybe with a slight tangent, and then kind of pull it back. So, a sponsor is allowed to develop pathways for both a full approval and conditional approval at the same time. Now, the instances that I've personally seen where they might look at two different indications, where that this product could be used for this indication and this indication. So we're going to continue kind of down the road for full approval on this, but we're going to pursue this one for conditional approval. So those can be done in parallel. I suppose the only con that comes to mind is if you said, right, we're going to get conditional approval, and maybe if you had continued and plugged on forward, right, maybe you could have received full approval, but in the end, at the same time as your conditional, but maybe if you kind of delayed in getting that clinical trial started until you did some other work, then you get the conditional, and then later on, then the full approval comes later. As folks are aware that with a conditional approval, you cannot, it's not legal for a veterinarian or a producer to use that in an extra label manner, right? So there are some advantages to that full approval, from a commercial standpoint. So I guess that would be the one disadvantage I might think of, is if you kind of got your reasonable expectation completed, and you're kind of waiting to start that clinical trial rather than full steam ahead, and then in retrospect look back and say, well, we had a few delays, and had we gone ahead and plugged forward, we could have just gotten a full approval, in the same amount of time. But
yeah. Okay. When have you seen CVM inquire about the use of central laboratories on a clinical study? And under which role does CVM evaluate central labs? Do they hold them to the criteria of a CRO, for example, and request CVs from central lab personnel?
Yeah, so we haven't, I haven't encountered this much recently. I would say that I've not seen them inquire for CVs and kind of treat them as a typical CRO. I don't know if others on the call have, but yeah, I
Yeah,
think for me, I think we've kind of um, not seen CVM come with that, that
you're kind of
level of
earlier stage with the
requirements.
smaller companies. I don't know the answer to that either. I mean, obviously we work with them closely. Um, but I don't know what happens on the other side of the table when it comes to CVM vetting them. Okay. Um, Somebody has chimed in and said they've already done and accepted clinical trial data electronically. Um, and they submitted a full efficacy technical section only electronically. Um, FDA has a pilot program to do this. We gave FDA full access to our Purley database. That's right. It's been a handful. I don't know how many exactly, but a bunch. I think we're doing one right now. Okay. Does the CA route cost more with CVM fees?
So no, it does not. One thing to realize, so when through the process, it's gonna be the same. You have to open an INAD. If a sponsor can get a sponsor fee waiver, they can get a waiver. If not, they'll have the annual sponsor fee, but that's going to be the same regardless. The one thing to consider if you're a small entity, right? So under 500 employees, then your first approval fee, your first ADUFA fee for an application is waived. That that does apply to whether it's a full or a conditional approval. So our understanding is that if you get a conditional approval, you will get that first fee waived. But then when you go to do the full approval several years later and submit that application, you would then have to pay that fee. So if you are a small entity company, that's the only instance where the fee might appear higher. Whereas if you got a full approval, it would be it'd be waived. But if you do conditional and then a full, you would end up having to pay one. So that might be the only instance where it might be more.
Gotcha. Okay. One more. Do you find clients are less likely to use conditional approval once they understand conditionally approved drugs must only be used on label?
Right now, I can't think of any examples where we've had clients that when they understand that say, we're gonna not pursue it solely because of that. Um, Again, our clientele is a little bit different in scope where many are early. And so I think a lot of them see it, as a good way to generate some interest and attractiveness to investors because many of them are looking to sell their product on to a larger company. So I would say right now, no, but I do think it is always a consideration.
Okay. Um, all right, we're running up on time. Any more final questions from the audience? Okay. Let's do one more. Here's a good one. Um, Looking in a crystal ball, what scientific or operational trends you think will most impact the future of CVM's alternative approval models? Do you foresee anything going to happen in the future that could impact this kind of maybe another alternative route, maybe some sort of expansion of this route?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'll start with this, right? I think through things like CBM's VIP program and expanding conditional approval and other programs, I think they're certainly recognizing that need for innovation and getting products to market. Certainly, we're seeing animal novel and innovative animal products getting approved in other geographies, and we're seeing it approved in the U.S. in humans. And so, I think CVM I hope is recognizing that there is a need for this and trying to find ways to increase that innovation pipeline and bring products forward. So, I think the more that we see, novel human products, novel products in other geographies getting approved, I think that trend will continue. What that next generation of a VIP program or something like that looks like, I don't have a great insight to that yet, but I do think that that this trend in innovation and technology and biotechnology, I think will continue, and I think we'll continue to see programs. I hope like this, continue.
Awesome. Okay, last
And
question.
the other thing I'll say too is the other thing is in a couple of years the legislation that covers expanded conditional approval is due to expire, and we anticipate that it would likely be renewed. And I know that there's some some hope that that we'll see some changes, right? So in terms of like the having to have separate labeling for a conditionally approved drug versus a fully approved drug, CMC requirements, right? Are there ways that we can make those a little more streamlined for conditional approval? So I know that there's some things that we hope that might continue to allow this program to evolve a little bit further, maybe make it a little bit better. This kind of this first 5 years is kind of the first run at it, or 10 years. This is kind of their first run at it. So I think we'll see some improvements in this program as well. At least we hope we will.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay, one more question I'd like to ask, I guess. If you could put anything on a billboard for innovative-minded new entrepreneurs looking to start animal health companies, from your perspective, it could be something about the conditional approval process, it could be something else. What would you want them to know before they come and approach you? What do you think is most important for them to know? Or it could be about the program. What do you want them to, what's the one thing you want them to know about the program? Did I stump you?
Sorry, you're talking to me, or you're talking to the guests?
No, you.
I'm sorry. I thought you said you're going to listen to the guests. I'm sorry.
No, that was you.
I'm sorry. I thought you said you're going to open it up. I'm
I was
sorry.
like, wow, that's a real.
I was waiting for the guest to answer. I thought you were saying you're going to put it on the bill. I'm sorry. I misunderstood that one.
No, it's to you. It's to you.
So if we were to put it, that's why I was like, well, but it's a pretty chatty group and everybody's all quiet now. All of a sudden, that's why. Sorry about that. So if we were to put it on the billboard and wanted them to know one thing. I think I got a couple thoughts. I guess I don't want to sound, kind of negative, but it's just I think it's important for them to know that it's a long road, right? It's a long road. I think that there's a lot of value in the animal industry, animal health. It's a growing market. We have a lot of clients that come in from the human side that think, oh, this would kind of be a good avenue to go just to kind of get it to approval quicker. And they realize, boy, this is, it's a challenge, but it is also a big market and a growing market. So I would say, it would be, kind of be prepared for the long haul, but they're entering an industry that is, I think has a lot of opportunity, and I think we're only going to continue to see growth. So stick with it. And the needs are a lot higher, right? I still practice on the weekends as a veterinarian, Saturday mornings, and we still use a lot of extra label human products because there's nothing available for animals, and a lot of clients that don't take advantage of the available therapies because they're not always great, if they require multiple frequent injections or things like that. So a lot of opportunity and a lot of value. They just need to stick with it.
It's a long road, but it's worth it.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Aaron, for being with us, for being our guest. Great discussion, lots of dialogue. I love it. Reminder before you leave, please fill out the survey, and hope to see everyone again on December 16th. Thanks, Aaron.
And thank you for having me, Tommy. I appreciate it. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody.
Of course.